Hello everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the 2022 International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination event. Our theme is Ending White Supremacy. I Can't Shut Up. Brought to you by the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, the Urban Alliance and Race Relation, and also the Labour Community Service. My name is Andria Babbington, and I'm the president of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, and I am pleased to be your host and moderator for this evening. We want to let you know that we have not been able to offer a transcription or closed captioning, and we apologize just to begin. And I also would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by the 13 treaties with the Mississaugas Credit. Thank you very much. Before we begin our program, we are going to do a welcome, and to start off, I'm going to invite Elder Catherine Brooks to open our event in this evening. Dr. Brooks is an elder, an Anishinaabe Kwe, Nipissing First Nation, Bird Clan, Red-tailed Hawk, a member of the Bear Medicine Society, who sits with the Turtle Clan in the Long House at Oneida Settlement. Let us welcome Dr. Catherine Burke, Elder Catherine Burke. Welcome.
Bonjour, Padaban Migaze Kwe Dishnakas, Dodum Bene, Nimkeke, Nimakalianakwat, Nimdishnawekwe. Nipissing Nadanjaba, Toronto Nadanjaba. I grew up in both places. Tonight we're going to do an opening to bring our minds together in a good way to talk about a very important thing, the elimination of racial discrimination. It has been a thing which has harmed us and which people have benefited from. And now we know that it needs to end. And I think we have many allies, even amongst the people who are benefiting from it, who also want to see it ended. So, in the manner of our tradition, this is fire. Fire represents that life that is in all of us. That spirit and that gift of life. This will serve as our council fire for tonight. It's a candle, but it represents that. This is the first direction. It is sweetgrass. It is the hair of our mother, the earth, and it's braided. It teaches a lesson. When you have one strand of it, it's easy to destroy it. It's easy to break it up. But when it is braided together, it's strong. We work together, we are strong. The sweetgrass is the first direction. It represents kindness. The way our mother, the earth, is kind to us and gives all her children everything they could ever need. Again, it's always the distribution that is the problem. When we light this, we offer smoke. I offer it to the east, to the south, to the west, and to the north. In times when we could meet together, we would have done a smudge with the sweetgrass. So I'll do it for us. There's also the teaching of the four directions. It's a prophecy, and it says that people were to come from all the four directions to Turtle Island, to this place. And we are going to learn something that our brothers and sisters around the world need to learn, which is how to live together in peace and harmony. We've got a ways to go to learn how to be in peace and harmony. But when I was a child, things were so much worse. So all the people working together have made progress in this. And I believe this prophecy will be fulfilled. Because sooner or later, we're going to realize that there's only one earth, and we are the children of this earth, and we have to take care of the earth. You know, that's our job as human beings, and also to help one another. So this prophecy will take time to fulfill. It doesn't come with an end date. It's something we will be working on probably for several, maybe more generations. But we must never, ever give up and stop working towards that idea of not having the differences in us be used against us. That we have to learn to live in peace and harmony. And then our people, all of us here, will be going out, our generations in the future will also be going out to help our brothers and sisters around the world to also learn how to live in peace and harmony. So we bring our minds together in a good way. We give thanks for all the gifts of the earth to us. Particularly at this time of the year, the standing people give us the sweet water, which you use to make maple syrup. And that is something which the earth has given us. The first fruits are the strawberries, but that'll be a while later. Right now, we can give thanks for those gifts, always, of course. So let us begin this meeting with good minds and good hearts. Chemagwech. Chemanitu, we say to you, Chemagwech. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned before, our theme, and again, tonight, the title of this event is called Ending White Supremacy. I Can't Shut Up. This is taken from the word of the late Bishop Desmond Tutu, who fought apartheid in South Africa and helped usher in a new era in that country. Everything is not fixed there, but all their systems are changing. The Nobel Peace Prize winner was an outspoken campaigner who made people sit up and listen the word over. Here is his famous quote about apartheid in Africa and the injustice everywhere. I wish I could shut up, but I can't and I won't. The International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination 2022 comes amidst ongoing convoy protest, amidst a time when many people are still experiencing the day-to-day inequity that COVID highlighted, and amidst the Russian assault on Ukraine. We call on Russia to stop its attack on the Ukrainian people. At the same time, we notice whose struggles get recognized and whose struggles don't. Whose lives matters? Whose is worth rescuing? Who has access to the power and who doesn't? People are fleeing for their lives in the Ukraine. But racism also shows up in this time. We have witnessed the racist treatment of people of color and refugees trying to leave the Ukraine. And racism exists here in Canada right now, including which refugees we are warmly welcome and which refugees are facing delays. Let us challenge racism everywhere we find it. It's going to take all of us for changes. Let's learn more tonight about what's got to be done, the unfinished work we need to do. As long as it takes, let's use tonight as another stepping stone to take the tools from here to continue the work that needs to be done. Tonight, we are fortunate to have some excellent speakers who will explore white supremacy and help identify ways we can challenge it and take action. First, we will hear from our keynote speaker, MPP Rima Berns-McGown. And then we will have a panel discussion followed by questions and answers. And we'll close with tools from our organization that you can use for challenge, advocate, or provide thoughtful self-care. Just before we begin, let me tell you how you can participate tonight. While we will be keeping participants muted, please feel free to use the chat to provide comment or to ask questions of the panelists later on. Thank you. So let's begin with our keynote speaker. Now, we want to welcome our keynote speaker for this evening, Dr. Rima Berns-McGown. She's the MPP for Beaches, East York. Rima was born in South Africa of a mixed background and is proud to be a member of Ontario's first Black caucus. Before she was elected, Rima taught diaspora studies at the University of Toronto. She has a long history of writing about and advocating for systemic change that creates equity and societies that truly work for everyone who lives in them. Everyone, please help me welcome Rima. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Andria. It is an enormous privilege and honor to be here with all of you today. I'm deeply moved and I love, love, love the title of the event. I have definitely been getting in trouble the last few years for being unable to shut up about ending white supremacy, and I'm okay with that. On March 21st, 1960, 69 Black South Africans protesting peacefully against apartheid's dehumanizing system of pass laws were shot in the back and killed. This was the Sharkville Massacre. In the years since, apologists for the regime tried to reframe the event, arguing that the protest turned ugly and that people, the protesters, were themselves violent. But the reason that the massacre hit so hard and had such an impact was precisely its brutality against innocent people, people marching peacefully to protest the pass books that Black and other racialized people were forced to carry, which allowed the police to stop and arrest them if they were not where the state permitted them to be, when the state permitted them to be there, were shot in the back as they marched. This is the story that South Africa heard in 1960. It was a harbinger of things to come, an indication of the violence that the apartheid regime would use to counter any and all attempts at liberation and change, however peaceful those were. The Sharpville Massacre is, of course, at the heart of the International Day for the Elimination of Racist Discrimination, designated in remembrance of Sharpville by the UN United Nations in 1966. Sharpville looms large in my personal and family mythology as well. I was 10 months old, and I obviously don't remember it, but Sharpville was the turning point for my parents and the reason that they eventually traded warmth and family in South Africa for the cold and isolation of Montreal. I do remember, even as a toddler, the tone of the agonized discussions, the despair, the determination. And I was 4 when we landed in a blinding January snowstorm in Montreal. I give you this paragraph as background because, like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, I also can't shut up about the toxicity and violence of white supremacy. I was born of a mixed biracial background in Johannesburg. 3 of my 4 grandparents were Jewish. My father's mother was Cape colored, as well as Afrikaner and dark enough complexion to be kicked out of her stepmother's Western Cape province house when she was still a child. The reason that she ended up in Johannesburg, met my grandfather and converted to Judaism to marry him. When I can't shut up, won't shut up about white supremacy, it is in part because I can see what it does to societies writ large in South Africa and around the world, but also in Canada. And it is partly because my own family history of intergenerational trauma, loss, and erasure has rendered me incapable, quite literally incapable, of silence. I don't want to take this precious time to lecture you about white supremacy and how it kills. You already know that. You know that it quite literally kills in the form of hate crimes, and you also know that it is the silent killer, that it underlies the over-policing and under-educating, the over-incarceration and under-caring, the over-surveillance and under-housing, underpaying, under-rewarding of Black and Indigenous peoples especially, but also of other people of color. I can easily fill 15 minutes with statistics that prove these facts. I have the receipts. We all have the receipts. But white supremacy is an endless demand that Black and Indigenous and other people of color endlessly prove what we all know to be true. So I'm not going to do that. I want instead to impress upon you the urgency of each and every one of you, no matter who you are, no matter what your position, your job, or whether you feel personally affected by white supremacy or not, the urgency of your speaking up, of you too becoming incapable of silence. First, please understand that by white supremacy, I am not referring right now to Confederate flags or the Proud Boys or neo-Nazis, whatever hard right violent group is spewing the most hateful hate at the moment. I mean something far more dangerous. I mean the very idea that whiteness is the default normal and that everything else and everybody else is somehow lesser than, not quite benign, not quite worthy of belonging, not quite us. That is the true demon. And the moment it rears its ugly head, we have a serious problem. And we have a serious problem. The moment that you see whiteness as normal, but Blackness or indigeneity or brownness as not quite normal, you have set the stage for all the overt violence that happens to Black and Indigenous and brown people. You have set the stage to reward proximity to whiteness, to shrug when you hear that another Black man or another Indigenous man has died at the hands of police, to shrug when you hear that Black and Indigenous and Muslim men are overrepresented in prisons, to shrug when you hear that Black prisoners are rated as more trouble than white ones, less likely to have access to showers and telephone calls and education, more likely to be put in isolation, more likely to spend time behind bars while waiting for bail hearings or to be denied bail. To shrug when you hear that doctors and nurses have accused Black and Indigenous people who seek help for soul-crushing pain of being duplicitous drug seekers. To shrug when you hear about microaggressions and macroaggressions in workplaces. To shrug when you hear about nooses on construction sites. To shrug when a Black woman objects to people touching her hair. To not speak up when you hear, can't they take a joke? It was just a joke. These people can't take a joke. To take offense when you are taken to task for claiming it's your free speech right to use the N-word whenever you want. I could go on, but you get the point. It all starts with the idea of whiteness as the default normal. And it is not just my job as an elected official or social justice advocate or social justice warrior or professional grouch to fix all the systems. It is your job too. I want to be very clear. There is no neutral here. If you are not actively working to rid your workplace, your community, and your society of white supremacy, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. To be neutral, as Desmond Tutu also said, is to choose the side of the oppressor. And what is fascinating about the revisionist history that claims that the peaceful marchers in Sharpville were actually somehow themselves violent is that it ignores the original state violence, the violence of the passbook. Imagine the passbook that says that because your skin is a certain hue, you can only be in such and such a place between the hours of X and Y, the hours when you might be there to be a servant or perform some underpaid menial work that keeps you in poverty, education unattainable, and forces your children to be miles away from you in a Bantustan that is not your home. How do you not see this passbook and the force that lies behind it as the violence? When unarmed people come together to protest this violence, unarmed people, mind, in what universe is it possible to justify murdering them by arguing that they became rowdy because they objected to the initial violence, the passbook? In another context, the yellow star. In another context, the braid and brown skin over which the Indian agent has full control. And remember here that South Africa learned to make Bantustans by copying Canadian Indian reserves. Think about this. When Indigenous people are overrepresented among unhoused people and kicked out of encampments on their own stolen. Think about this when the mayor of Toronto argues that the beatings of unhoused people in encampments and the young people who came to feed and support them occurred because they were activists who became rowdy. And when Black youth who ensure that unhoused people have food and blankets against the cold are told that they are the problem, that they are the aggressors, and charged with criminal offenses that can become albatrosses around necks, that can weigh people down, down, down into a hole of poverty and eventual homelessness. Think about where the initial violence lies. Identify the policies and the conditions and the racist barriers that force certain people into deep poverty and into homelessness in the first place. How is this different from Sharpville? It might not be a bullet in the back, but it is a silent killer. And when you don't speak up, thin blue line because it doesn't affect you. When you don't speak up about the noose or the swastika on the construction site because it doesn't affect you. When you know that Black construction workers are not getting jobs, but you don't speak up because it doesn't affect you, it's not actually different from Sharpville. It is the exact same phenomenon. And when you know better, silence is on you. Let me tell you a story. A few weeks ago, when I was fortunate enough to address you in another context, I mentioned that a 4-year-old Black child in Kitchener had had the police called on him because he became distraught at school. A 4-year-old baby, separated from his siblings, he's part of a triplet, who became distraught at the separation. 3 police officers were called, and the child ended up in the back of a police cruiser. Yeah, who does that? A couple of weeks ago, my colleague Laura May Lindo, the chair of the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, critic for anti-racism and for post-secondary education, and MPP for Kitchener Centre, introduced a private member's bill into the Ontario legislature that would bring in measures to eliminate racist discrimination. Exactly what we're talking about here today in education, in all of education, from kindergarten through post-secondary. What Laura May's Bill 67 would do that others have not done is to put in place the accountability measures that would assure that school boards, colleges, and universities are actually doing the work. It demands equity audits and actual accountability to ensure that teachers, education workers, principals, professors, everyone in education is doing their part, learning to do better, proving doing better, because nobody has the right to inflict the violence of racism, poverty, or pain on anybody else. And friends, we need to be done with performativity, that saying of the right words, nice words, while doing exactly nothing or not nearly enough. That prime ministerial taking a knee while refusing to fix policing. Or worse, that premier thing of saying that racism has no place in Ontario while actually and actively exacerbating the conditions that force Black people into extreme poverty. We need to be over and done with that nonsense. Laura May's bill passed second reading, but it has gone to committee to die. The government will not pass it, and it certainly won't pass it before this June's election. They wanted the Black vote, the Muslim vote, the Jewish vote, but it will never be enacted. Not unless you force them to pass it by speaking up, by refusing to buy the nonsense, by telling them they will not get your votes, they will not get your money unless they pass it, by refusing to buy the performativity, by insisting on action. And meanwhile, Laura May and her team are facing an onslaught of hate for having introduced that bill. A number of the big name white supremacist boosters began to treat her bill as the end of the world. And before you know it, the right-wing hate machine took up the cause. There are a number of specific reasons why Laura May's bill and why Kitchener, among them the fact that there are 3 right-wing parties vying for the extreme right-wing protest vote, and a right-wing Kitchener area MPP is trying to ensure that her right-wing party wins out. But meanwhile, the hate is real and terrifying and growing. This past weekend, an attacker wielding an axe and bear spray stormed a mosque at the daybreak Fajr prayer in Mississauga. Who knows what would have happened had he not been tackled to the floor by a young, agile worshiper. And meanwhile, the Globe and Mail had a story this morning about just how hard it is to get a hate crime prosecuted. We all remember the number of police officers and former security officials and former military officers who actively supported the overt racism of the trucker convoy. Hate continues to grow in Canada. If you are silent, you have taken the side of the oppressor. The International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is not a day for performative backslapping so you can go home and feel good about yourself. It is a day to commit to action. It's a day to commit to never staying silent. And I want to make one final point, which is that racism, all forms of racism and discrimination, do not only hurt the people who are targeted, they also hurt the people doing the targeting. And that's because white supremacy warps societies. It causes them to be less harmonious and more fractious. It ensures that there is more poverty. It ensures less creativity, less innovation, less progress, less forward momentum. And all of these things are expensive for society as a whole. Nobody benefits. We cannot solve the climate crisis, that existential climate crisis, if we are not focused, all of us together, on it. Nobody benefits from white supremacy. South Africa has spent the decades since the end of formal apartheid grappling with this warping and its aftershocks, which affect its economy, its security, its safety, and everyone's ability to have a good life. And that will be our fate here as well, if we don't act to eliminate white supremacy along with all forms of racial discrimination and every other form of discrimination and bigotry as well. So stand up, speak up, be a person who can't shut up. So very much.
Wow. Wow, thank you, thank you. And I applaud you, and I ask for everyone, you're on screen. This is one of the moments that I would love to be in person for all of us together, and we are not, and we can use our reaction on the screen. So I just want to say thank you, Rima, for coming out this evening with us, and you're hitting the topic. And I would say the last few weeks, maybe over 2 years, with everybody at a pause in this pandemic and reflecting on what left behind since COVID and what we're facing right now, that you actually sum up a lot of it. And I just to say to everyone, before we wrap up tonight with the panelists adding on to this, for me, just putting back to you the question, are you gonna keep silent? Are you one of them that won't shut up? And if you are the quiet type, I think it's time for you to start speaking up. If I tell you this, I am, when my family saw me doing this work, a lot of them was surprised because I was the quietest of the family. I barely speak. And I got to this country and I became angry. So I put it back to you to either commit, if you're the quiet type, to speak up and take action, because no one gonna do it if you don't. If you're tired, this is not the time for you to rest. If you're too tired, then you need to mobilize others to pick up the torch from there. So with that, I'm gonna turn over to my partner to pick this up, Neethan Shan. He's the Executive Director of the Urban Alliance for Race Relation, and he'll be moderating the panelists tonight, which will just connect the dots to a lot of this conversation that's going on. If anyone is in doubt or thinking that we are mistaken, this is another opportunity to hear from the panelists. So I'll turn over to you, Neethan.
Thank you, Andria, and thank you, Elder Catherine Brooks, for positive vibes in the starting to get us all together in the room in the right space to commit to continuing this work. And thank you very much, and Rima Berns-McGowan, for your amazing work over the last 4 years, but also for setting the stage today, setting the scope today for this conversation. It is an important conversation to be had on International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination. As you know, it's a day of remembrance as we remember those 69 lives that were lost for standing up against racism 62 years ago. So it is a day of remembrance. It's not just those lives. You know, racism had claimed many thousands of lives before that and continues to claim lives today. And it is an international day, but there's a local context to this and a very significant local context to this in Canada as we continue to lose lives today, every day, to the silent killing of white supremacy and racism, the denial of healthcare, the denial of education, employment, housing, and all of those factors together are continuing to claim lives, in addition to the direct killing on racial and hate-motivated actions. And as we speak today, as we gather today, we are privileged to be in this space to talk today and do that. There are people who are at their workplaces right now actively resisting racism by being in spaces that are very much, places of white supremacy. There are students in classrooms that are in learning environment right now in Canada, having to face white supremacy and Eurocentrism while they continue to learn. So the act of resistance is happening not just in this room, but in the active pursuit of continuing to struggle and survive and resist. And so today we remember all of them. We remember those who have sacrificed their opportunities and put their lives at risk to speak out, to do what they did, so that we can continue to have these opportunities today in this room. And there's a sense of privilege that comes with being able to do this. It's also a day of awareness raising, and we have to be very clear about what that awareness is. Enough of this is not the Canada we are used to, or this is not acceptable in Canada kind of conversation. We have to be real about our awareness. What are we raising awareness? Is it enough just to say, stop racism? Racism has no place in Canada. In fact, we need to get off those usual lines and go into the deeper conversation. And that's why today, here, we are raising awareness about white supremacy. Let's call it what it is, and let's name it what it is. And let's address it head on, because walking around in different ways around this conversation hasn't helped. In fact, many people were surprised by the level of white supremacy displayed in these protests, or I won't call it protests, in these gatherings in Ottawa and other places. And I was actually surprised at the surprise, because Canada has centuries of white supremacy. It just, I was talking earlier and said white supremacy is an adaptive animal. It finds its new ways to manifest itself and come through. And COVID regulations or restrictions have given it another kind of outing to come through it. But it is not a new thing. And in fact, as Rima mentioned, today our concern is not just that group of people who are shouting hateful messages and carrying hateful symbols. They need to be held accountable. They need to be brought to justice and to be talked about and addressed. But we are more concerned today and always around white supremacy in our school system, white supremacy in the healthcare system, in our justice system, in our education, employment, housing, arts sector. And that's why this panel is here with us today, because we want to talk about that, and we want to talk about how white supremacy manifests itself in all these spaces. Because today it continues to survive and thrive because there are enablers around us. They're at our schools, they're at our healthcare setting, they're in our workplaces, they're on our at our dining table. The people who enable these things to continue and flourish, because racism is a system of advantage. We are often talked about racism as a system of disadvantage, because then we start to focus on people who are impacted, and then they throw in some money or some charitable kind of acts to say we care. But there is a group of people who have benefited and continue to benefit, and racism is a form of advantage. And unless people who benefit from it acknowledge that they are beneficiaries of this exploitative framework and take action and take responsibility, there won't be enough change that we will be able to get. So I'm excited about this panel. I'll go right into the panel now. I'm going to introduce all four of them together, and then we'll have one by one. First is Rosemarie Powell. She's the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. As a passionate advocate for social, economic, and environmental justice, Rosemarie leads TCBN, that is the Toronto Community Benefits Network, to successfully initiate community benefits agreement for infrastructure projects such as Eglinton, Crosstown, and Rexdale Casino Woodbine. These community benefits agreements result in good jobs for equity-seeking groups. Welcome, Rosemarie. Thank you for joining us. And our next speaker, who I'm very excited to have, Kayla Escoffery, is a grade 10 student with an impressive resume of equity and anti-racism work. She is the founder of Young Melanin and Feminine, and she's on the executive of the Black York Region Youth, and the founder of High Schools Black Students Association. Welcome, Kayla. Excited to have you here, and thank you for all your work. And we are joined by Jacqueline Silvera, who's the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Anti-Racism at the University Health Network. Jacqueline was recently the winner of the UHN's Local Impact Award for her work on anti-racism, anti-Black racism, and anti-oppression. And then last but not least, we have Yoon. Jean is a playwright and actor born in the United States and raised in Toronto. Jean has lived in and worked across Canada and around the world. She's well known for playing Uma in the CBC hit Kim's Convenience. Jane is also a multiple award winner, ACTRA Toronto Award 2017, Burke's Diamond Tribute 2019, ACTRA Toronto Award of the Excellence in 2020. She's also an activist who speaks out on racism and inequity in the cultural sector. This is an amazing group of panelists here, and we are here to talk together about taking this concept or this concept of white supremacy into how it manifests itself in our spaces around us. And not just how it benefits, who in those settings are enabling it to continue, and how do we identify and hold those who enable those things accountable, and how do we create change to dismantle these forms of oppression that exist within each of these sectors. And all of the bios that I read are a very short version of the long list of accomplishment all of our panelists have. So actual longer bio would be posted on the chat, if not already posted. It will be posted soon. And if you have questions for the panelists, please type them up in the chat, and I'll take. I won't be able to take all of the questions, but I'll take whatever I could to have the panelists go about addressing some of those. So I'll start with Rosemarie. Rosemarie, you are here with us to talk about employment, and we know who is precariously employed, and we know who is denied sick days. We know all of the factors around employment conditions, labor that are reinforcing racial inequity. So can you talk to us about how you see white supremacy manifesting in employment, and how we can go about addressing it?
Well, thank you very much, Neethan. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thanks for the invitation. So ready or not, the economy is starting to get back on track and at breakneck speed post-COVID-19. And all levels of government are investing heavily in infrastructure to help fuel this recovery. The new Scarborough subway extension, Eglinton West LRT extension, Ontario Line, and Yonge North subway extension, all approximately $30 billion of taxpayer investment. Not only will it bring much needed relief to a transit and transportation network that is running at beyond capacity, and not only will it play a crucial role in building back better, but we know that publicly funded transit infrastructure projects are equally opportunities to uplift and transform communities, providing sorely needed jobs, procurement opportunities, and community benefits to residents who have been historically cut out of our shared prosperity. Now, unfortunately, just over the last month, Metrolinx, the government agency responsible for building regional transit, sought to cut back on years of hard work the community, and they had actually put in place to address systemic issues with how government plans, build, and operate public transit. As part of a historic community benefits agreement around the construction of the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, for example, Metrolinx committed to a 10% equity hiring for historically disadvantaged communities and equity-seeking groups. And crucially, community groups received regular reports, provided feedback, and were able to push back when the project outcomes lagged behind on commitments. But there are many signs that Metrolinx has changed its attitude towards community inclusion in the planning, procurement, and implementation process. They have gone ahead and hired new contractors without any requirements for community benefits. It seems that gone are the days when Metrolinx sought meaningful community consultation. Now Metrolinx public relations and communication staff simply inform communities of their decisions. Instead of talking about minimum hiring targets for groups that have been historically shut out of the construction industry, like Black and Indigenous residents and women, Metrolinx pivoted to vague claims about fair hiring practices and public realm improvements. Now, when TCBN brought these concerns to light, there was a quick about face where the media was informed that the new transit projects would keep the hiring targets in place. However, there has been no official confirmation in writing of this decision. And so TCBN, our Community Labor Coalition, remains concerned that without real measurable commitments and community participation, Metrolinx is setting itself up and our communities to fail. And while we do welcome the assurances that the agency would uphold a minimum 10% target for equity deserving groups, this shouldn't be an aspirational goal, but a contractual to be expanded upon first step to hold companies accountable. More than just assurances as a community, we want to see a signed community benefits agreement that spells out the roles and responsibilities of each party to fulfill the commitments, as much as specific programs put in place to deal with systemic issues affecting workers from Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities that we all know the industry has still not managed to fully address. Lest we forget, it was just in 2020 and 2021 when 8 nooses were found at 4 construction sites in the city of Toronto. 2 of these incidents occurred at Metrolinx's Eglinton Crosstown LRT construction site. Black workers have also reported being harassed, assaulted, feeling unsafe while working on construction projects in Toronto. We believe Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario must ensure a safe and healthy environment free from hate, harassment, and bigotry for all workers on these projects, especially Black workers. All contractors must be required to conduct anti-racism training with a focus on anti-Black racism for all workers, supervisors, managers, executives, including any subcontractors, and to provide a project-specific anti-racism strategy and incident response plan with an emphasis on ensuring contractor evaluation and compliance. Now, these are the intentional types of efforts that we insist must be in place in order to transform the construction industry for the better. These are the types of issues that as community, labor, and industry, we must work together to achieve. And so this is why today we really encourage everyone to pay attention and speak up, and let's not forget where we've come, and we have a far way to go, and it's only together that we're going to be able to do this. Thank you, Neethan.
Thank you very much, Rosemarie, for taking us through that and giving us the context of the community benefits agreements as a form of establishing racial justice. As we continue to see, if folks are really keen on removing racism from employment, people need to support meaningful investment, meaningful policy changes, whether it be employment equity legislation. If majority of the people are opposed to racism, why not the majority supporting employment equity related intervention? So there's a disconnect between what people say in Canada and what people really support in terms of intervention, and we all need to rally together to make sure that our actions are synced to our words. So thank you very much, Rosemarie, for taking us through that. And now we move on to Kayla. Kayla is going to be talking to us about the education system and experience of young people in education system. And Kayla, thank you for joining, and thanks for the work that you're doing in York Region, because as a former trustee in York Region, I know how hard it is to do anti-racism work out in York Region. And so you're doing pioneering work setting this up for generations to come. So thank you very much and appreciate you joining. So take us through your experiences in the education system as to how you see white supremacy and racism manifest itself in classrooms, in school settings, and in the experience of young people.
Thank you, Neethan. And also thank you to the Labor Council for having me speak on an important topic that would not be acknowledged a couple of years ago, white supremacy. Ingrained in a number of our systems in our society, the word white supremacy cuts like a double-edged sword. Throughout the month of February, I was able to put together a video that highlighted Black students in my school community. Showcased on the last day of Black History Month, it created a discussion in my business class about student voice, white supremacy, representation, and many other issues that affect students of color. A conversation that was only supposed to last 15 minutes had turned into the whole 75-minute period. One thing that stuck out to me the most was I had made a comment responding to the need for reform, acknowledging that white supremacy is well ingrained in our society. My teacher, who is a white male, asked me a question. So does the school board I work in is built on white supremacy? I took a deep breath in and said, yes. He then replied with, how do you think that makes me feel? And without even thinking, it came out, uncomfortable. When it comes to white supremacy, we look for blatant remarks of racism that are easy to point out. But when it comes to the school system, the tiniest actions demonstrate that white supremacy is well ingrained and not fully dismantled. I speak to things like the school curriculum that does not move fast enough when it comes to how fast the world moves, not embodying diverse spots, but continuing to focus on the white perspective. When it came to my time to pick my book in English class this year, I looked for a book that focused on the Black perspective. The only book I could find was of a white man training Black during times of segregation. This only distanced my interest when it came to this project, as there was no effort of finding a book to represent me. But when it comes to Black History Month, there is a calling to focus on Black history, bodies, and minds during the month of February, but not all year round. That further pushes the narrative to Black students that they are not important until a certain time of the year, and that the white perspective is superior as we focus on it all 365 days out of the year. I also think of moments of white supremacy when school boards put the feelings of white administrators over the safety of Black students, screaming to students that although speaking up is an option, it is not welcome. I also think of how we shape students into believing that their cultural upbringings does not compare to the Eurocentric lens. When Black students are not allowed to wear do-rags to school or scared of stereotypes that come with wearing a do-rag, there is now an underground understanding that the Eurocentric standards are the only thing deemed acceptable in a school environment. But how do we combat white supremacy? Or how do we create dialogue around the word white supremacy that does not make people distant? I believe it starts with open dialogue, whether talking with peers, friends, or family, but especially in the classroom about these issues. When I answered my teacher's question on how the school system is based on white supremacy and how my comment may have made him uncomfortable, his response of being open, vulnerable, and willing to learn allowed us as a class, a community, leaving knowing that this was a space where ideas like white supremacy and reform can be tackled and how we together can combat set issues. I think it also comes from giving students the basic understanding of racism and how we often see it as an individual issue when it is truly a systematical problem. Teaching this to students gives them the basics when it comes to thinking critically about race. Not only stopping at the school system, we as a whole need to remember that racism is a systematical problem. Lastly, it begins with shifting the focus of making racism palpable by setting guidelines and the expectations of discomfort, messiness, and realism before discussing these topics, because that's what it comes with when talking about white supremacy. Especially in the era of social media, we have tried to make social issues digestible, which is a good starting point, but we must go in depth when talking about these complex ideas. As we continue to see the progression of these conversations, I look to teachers, people like my business teacher, who are not afraid to have these particular dialogues in their classroom, who treat their students with respect. I looked at times in my elementary school career where my school continued to strive to make the Black perspective amplified through activities surrounding Black hair and African literature. I also look at programs outside the school system like BYR Youth, who continue to call out school boards and strive to create open dialogue for a better tomorrow. White supremacy, a double-edged sword, a word so powerful that churns heads, creates discomfort, but ultimately describes the soil that we are working with when it comes to growing a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kayla, for your remarks. At this time, we also want to acknowledge all of you who are refusing to shut up in systems where you could be targeted, and in many cases students are being targeted. The educators who are speaking up in the system, who are often sometimes on the forefront congratulated, but then on the back denied promotion or denied opportunities, and we see the system doing that to many educators, anti-racist educators who are speaking out and won't shut up in school system. And so today, a lot of parents, who have been given trespassing tickets in schools for not shutting up against racism. So as the education system continues to get challenged by parent group, particularly led by Black mothers across the system, where transformation is taking place, and their work needs to be acknowledged. And it's one school board at a time that's happening. Unfortunately, there's no system-wide approach to this, and there's denial of a systemic issue in many places. But as we talk about education system, it is critical to acknowledge all of those voices and all of the sacrifices and the opportunities that they have lost as continuing to champion the cause. And just before we move on to the next topic, I think Urban Alliance in our last few years have done a lot of professional development for educators, and it's been really difficult to get across the point that they need to self-reflect a lot more, because all of the people that most of the people we are in touch with, they want to jump to the toolkit. Give us the toolkit, we'll start doing this work, and do not want to take any truth and accountability around what has been happening in the system. How have they been reinforcing in some ways the racial inequities in their own classrooms? So this feeling of defensiveness, this feeling of, I'm in this profession, it's a hard job, underpaid, stretched, doesn't make it an excuse in any way to not be self-reflective about what our classrooms have been doing to our children, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, about how education has been a place that is often thought to be a remover of inequity, but has been a center of reinforcing inequities in our society. And unless we recognize that and start to reflect on what our system has been doing to our children, who are now parents and grandparents in many ways, it is not going to be a change. So thank you for the work. And now we move on to another system that has been very difficult to break through in terms of recognizing white supremacy exists in, that is healthcare system. And so Jacqueline Silvera is joining us. Jacqueline, healthcare often again is not thought about in a sense that it's harder and harder to talk about some of the systems, about what white supremacy and racism does in those systems, and healthcare is one of them. Though there's increased awareness today than before, can you talk to us about how white supremacy is manifesting itself in healthcare system, and what kind of work you're doing and could be done around dismantling it in healthcare?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I think the first premise I start with is resistance is healthy and necessary. And the advent of racism really has done everything to squelch, deny, and disarm that resistance. Also within healthcare, I think it's necessary to understand that it's based on a model. So racism, the discipline of health within the context of race, is based on what is called allopathic medicine. That's understood to be Western medicine. It speaks to how disease, remedies, surgery, or drugs are used. Now, what is interesting when you understand where this comes from, it's constructed on superiority. It has made those who medicine has benefited from most inferior. As we all know, it's a construct. So a little bit of history. John D. Rockefeller, the rich guy, oil, he and a partner of his engaged in what we would call the business plan around medicine. He purchased into a pharmaceutical that was German-owned, operating in Auschwitz in World War II. In front of Congress, there was a discussion and a decision made that medicine had to be standardized. That model excluded homeopathic complementary medicine. But we go one step further. Rockefeller, paired with Andrew Carnegie, his partner, they started the funding of medical schools. That funding of medical schools set a strict condition that only allopathic medicine could be taught. The slogan at the time that was used, a pill for an ill. Now, you may say, what does this mean? It means that healthcare, Western medicine, is founded on economic viability, capitalism, and entrepreneurship. But to really understand this business model, we need to, and I argue that colonialism, oppression, created the positioning of racism and justified medical genocide in the name of research. What does that even mean? It means that this notion of research that we understand to be the cornerstone, very important to medicine, relied on access to test subjects that could not consent to experimentation, and always under horrific conditions. What does that mean? Enslaved people. I'm going to share a few examples of where this comes from and trace the history. 1768, John Crerar, a British doctor, he worked on a plantation in rural Jamaica, experimented with smallpox to a population of about 850 enslaved people. Those individuals did not have the opportunity to consent. 1773, Grenada, experimentation, again with a tropical disease called yaws, took the same framework. We've all heard of Marion Sims, 1845, who began experimenting on enslaved women, again, who could not consent without any type of anesthetic, etc. 1932, the Tuskegee study around syphilis of the 600 Black men in Macon County, Alabama, were again treated similarly. I could go on. What does this look like in today's context? Well, I don't know if many of you saw the illustration of Chide Berry Ebi, an aspiring neurosurgeon who first drew the image, the illustration of a Black woman, and it was a cross-section carrying a fetus. It was in color. People were shocked and in disbelief because this isn't something that is typically seen. What does that mean for today? What that means for today is the issues of 200, 220 years ago and more is still prevalent in our current situation. It means that medical dermatology students who question in private why they are only practicing on white skin, why, when individuals go to the doctor and they don't understand why there is so much confusion, what that means to misdiagnosis, what it means for a practitioner being hailed as a good doctor, but a good doctor for whom? Only for a percentage or part of the population. I often wonder and ask, how can you be an excellent doctor if you're only providing good care to a part of the population? The question of enablers of racism and white supremacy and holding accountable. One, we have to agree that racism is omnipresent, and we have to agree that those few crucial first steps in identifying and understanding racism is necessary. We need to understand that accepting the disproportionate and negative health outcomes for people, it's not a whim, it's not a nice to have, it's necessary. We need to understand that it is necessary to combat racism in and of itself. We need to recognize the racial bias in healthcare and the implicit bias that affects the interpersonal dynamics and again, the diagnosis. We need to understand that researchers who continue to theorize how cultural depictions perpetuate stereotypes and prejudice. We need to understand that these racial inequities in healthcare, as one of the previous speakers, results in death. We need to be very clear that while we wait and while we hope for change, it is not going to come. Our healthcare leaders need to say the words racial discrimination and racial justice. They need to be deliberate. They need to be clear. There needs to be a prioritization around standardizing systems of care. We also need to have not change, but reform. And, in the interest of time, I will say this quickly. We need to stand firmly on the need to speak out, stand out, to recognize that as we are speaking about the injustice, the disparities in healthcare, people are dying. As I end, I'm going to very quickly say, there's always an opportunity for some monochrome of celebration. And one of those points is recognizing the first Black woman Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is going through the nominee process for Supreme Court in the US.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline, for your remarks, and thanks for taking us through some examples of how healthcare continues to be a sector in which white supremacy continues to kill, if you may, directly and indirectly as well. So our last speaker is Jean. And before I go to Jean, I would like to ask folks if you have any questions. We might be able to get one question per panelist after this after we hear from Jean. So if you want to put a question, please put a question, but also say if you want to direct it to one of the speakers, and I'll try to get them. If not, I'll have a question to wrap up for each of you, to have 2 minutes for each of you to say something quickly. I know it's a pretty tight schedule today, but we want to be respectful of the time that folks have committed to be here. So I'll go to Jean. Jean, you're going to talk about the sector that influences many people's thinking, entertainment, public opinion is shaped by arts and culture, and again, a sector where we have a lot of white folks in arts sector who think they are great, including everyone, but we know deep inside how much difficult it is to have conversation about race and racism and inequities and white supremacy in this space. So take us through what your experiences are, and we'll
okay, so yeah. So I started as a theater artist in the 80s, and it was a really terrible time as an actor of color. There was no money, and the doors were absolutely slammed shut. And funding was an issue for theater companies, and it was a very hard time. The 90s was largely about addressing systemic barriers in arts councils, definitions of professionalism, and building supports for artists, actors, writers on a grassroots level. Where I am now as an artist is, you know, the flowering of that theater work led to Kim's Convenience and to national television. And what I want to talk about now is that basically the basic formula is that the more money's involved, the less power any person of color has. And when you're dealing with the telling of stories, when you don't have control of the story and you don't have control of the money, it shifts completely. So representation, when we were talking about it in the 80s and 90s, was largely a question of, I would say, employment equity, and issues of story and authenticity of story were sort of siphoned off into what was called the cultural appropriation discussion. But now where we are in film and television is that you have mature artists, actors, writers still struggling in film and television just to break through. We're literally hitting the glass ceiling. We're hitting it so hard, we're getting concussions. It's what happens when you are working as an artist with another artist who is a covert racist is that when you're actually on the front lines of that discourse, when you actually lay out why there are issues, what's really troubling is the flurry of gaslighting, but then what I'm starting to think of as the white fragility enforced apology. And it is really traumatizing when you have an entire white power structure that is surrounding you and telling you in the telling of an Asian story that it is your responsibility to apologize to another artist when you pointed out a cultural inaccuracy. Because what ends up happening is like, oh my God, you guys be racist. And you're responsible completely for their inability to control their reaction. It is exhausting. It is terrifying. And it is terrifying because right now, where we're at now, although a lot of great work is being done and we're seeing more and more producers of color rising up, these kinds of personal interactions in an industry like entertainment can be weaponized against artists who speak out. We can be labeled difficult. We can be labeled troubling. And in an industry like film and television where you're freelance, there is no employment protection once you're done the job. The question is, will you get the next job? And it's a lot of artists simply won't speak out. They'll speak out about it later, but it's It's so important because the stories that we tell are what unify and what become a foundation of our cultural identity. And so many racist jokes are there's this thing, someone just said earlier, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. How many times is racism that's in your face brushed off? It's just a joke. There was an incident on set where I was asked to do something which I did not believe my character would ever do. They thought she was to come out with shorts that looked like she was nude and can be completely unaware of it. No Korean woman would ever be unaware of something like that. And when I pushed back, it was quite difficult. It was quite difficult. That episode, the joke was, oh, isn't it funny? But why would it be funny when it was humiliating this woman, sexualizing a mother character for, it's funny to whom? To whom is that funny? It's not funny to Asian women. It's not funny to women who are going to go, why would she? It's funny to white guys. It's the POV of the story. There are too many shows out there that completely normalize the stupid white guy who's lovable. Just go through your movies and ask yourself, how many of those are the stupid white guy who's lovable? That is soft porn for white supremacy. Our stories are important. We need to get them on the air. We need to get them on the stages. We need to be fully humanized. This is a tool for against white supremacy, but at the very top, right now, all the power is still in largely covert white supremacist hands. When I went through the give, send, go list, I don't know how many went through it like that when it went out on Twitter. I found the name of someone I know who works in my industry. More than one. That's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Jean. Totally, value the work you're doing in raising awareness around racism, and while being in a sector that, again, opportunities are often filtered out to people who wouldn't be shutting up, but you refusing to shut up and speak out definitely, is something that is probably costing you opportunities in many ways, but that is something that we all appreciate. So thank you very much. So I'm going to ask the co-host to bring all of us to the spotlight, and we'll do a 5 minutes, 1 minute each wrap up. And this is just basically to find out from you, what can allies and other racialized folks do to help your work, because you're doing this within the system in some ways. So how can we help? How can we gather together? How can we commit to a meaningful course of action within your sector? What is your call to action to people who care about you and your well-being? Because you're fighting this within the system, and we want to be there together to help. So maybe I'll start going in the reverse order. Jean, I'll start with, what can we do to improve things in the arts and culture sector?
Publicly support artists of color and works of color that you find inspiring, that are breaking boundaries. Share those stories with others, and money talks. Yeah, pretty much it.
Definitely. And we need to, communities of color need to invest more into our arts to make sure our artists get the forum and the platform to continue to excel as well, and be there for them. Jackie, let's go to healthcare sector. What can folks outside the sector do to help to dismantle the work that's being done internally to dismantle racism? Sorry, you're on mute, Jackie.
Okay, there we go. I apologize for that. The first thing is participate in any of the patient advisories, councils, groups. Volunteering, I don't believe in free labor, but becoming involved with any of the hospitals' activities that are taking place. Most important, understand the system, be clear on when you need to advocate for yourself and others. And that may mean forming community support groups. It is pivotal that people understand that they have voice within the healthcare system. In Canada, it is publicly funded. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And a large chunk of our resources go into healthcare system, and it's important to hold it accountable, and not just in the service delivery, but also in the employment side of things.
Absolutely.
Being employed. And I'll go to Kayla next. How can we support young people who are pioneering this work like you in fighting racism in the schools?
I would say probably looking into the anti-racism policies in our boards, like going into boards, seeing what they are doing specifically when they are saying that anti-racism is the message, as well as listening to students and continuing the dialogue with them, asking what they need and what they want to see in the school board. That open communication is very important for us and very needed.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Kayla. And last but not least, Rosemarie, breaking down barriers in employment. What else can we do as communities together?
Well, community benefits is working. We know that. We've built a movement over the last 9 years, and community benefits existed way before that. It's not a political football, that can be bounced around from one party to another. This is a grassroots community up movement that is really demanding that when major infrastructure projects are being built, that community be thoroughly consulted, and that they're going to look at all the potential impacts and negative impacts that would happen, and how to mitigate that, and how to make sure that you're carving out opportunities for those who have been historically left out of the labor market. We want to see the rich diversity of Toronto reflected on those job sites. It's not acceptable to have a population of over 50% racialized people. To see that within the construction industry, it still remains exceedingly low, approximately 11% in the Toronto area. So community benefits is working. We do have a video that we would love to share, but it's just the idea that, just from TCBN alone over the last 2 years, just before the pandemic, with the support of labor, with the support of the construction industry, we were able to get over 360 people hired on these different projects. If we don't have community benefits in place, it's not going to happen out of the goodness of anybody's heart. It really has to be intentional. We need a community benefits agreement in place, and we invite everybody to join the movement and to support us. Sign the petition. I'm going to put it in the chat as well, and circulate the video and see if we can get some people inspired about wanting to participate.
Thank you, Rosemarie. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to all of our panelists for doing this with us. And I also want to say, there are many sectors that are missing here. Housing, even within sectors here, environmental movement is another movement where we still continue to face white supremacy as well. So it's important to recognize there are sectors missing, but at the same time, because we brought in 4 sectors, we weren't also able to go deeper into this conversation as well because time is limiting. So, but within that context, everyone has given us some thoughts to go ahead with. This is a day of commitment, as we said, a commitment to action. And as we saw, white supremacy is alive and thriving in many spaces, including the spaces we talked about. So let's hold the enablers accountable. Let's hold them accountable for what they're doing. Let's hold those who are benefiting from racism accountable, and have them take action as well, have them take meaningful action while we continue to show solidarity for each other. So thank you, panelists. We are almost at the end. There are a few slides and presentation around what are some of the tools you could use. So I'm going to pass it back to Andria to take us through the last bit of the presentations. And thank you again.
Thank you very much. Before I go any further, I know it's getting late, and I'm just going to encourage everyone to stay with us. It's been, I believe that you're enjoying the discussion so far, and hopefully that you'll stay with us for the wrapping up of it. We're not going to be too long, but we appreciate you staying with us for that. I just want to echo what Neethan said before, and just to appreciate the panelists for coming out and speaking out tonight, and and just give us a little bit more strength and encouragement to continue on the journey that we are on. And if we're not, just to, when we get off, to really reassess ourselves to see, are we behind, or what do we need to do to start taking action. Thank you very much, Neethan. As we were preparing for the event tonight, we were also talking about how vital anti-racist work is, and especially at this point in time. Neethan Shan and Faduma Mohammed and myself are three racialized people who are leaders in our own community. And for us and those we led, the stakes are very high. We co-wrote an opinion piece called "We Can't Afford to Shut Up About White Supremacists," which we will share with you in the chat and also by email. It's very important that you spend some time just to take a look at it as they put it in the chat, and we can also email that back to you as well. When we really think about action, it's also important to have the tools that we can use. It's not just about talking, but we also want the tool. We need to provide those tools that we can use to take on this job. We need to look after ourselves so that we can continue to struggle against white supremacists and racism. And we need program and policy ideas that we can use to tackle racism internally and externally. And tools that could to stand in solidarity with each other. So before I pass it on to Sharon, I also want to echo, as we hear from the panelists and some of what they put out also, that's very important. The takeaway from that is very important for us to speak out. We have to continue this conversation. We got to stand out. That's also what I'm hearing, and the support, and just to put your money where your mouth is. That's very important for us to do that if we're going to commit ourselves. So Sharon Simpson will tell us about the tools available through the Labor Community Service. Over to you, Sharon. Are you there, Sharon?
Mute, Sharon.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. I just found it. So yeah, we're talking about tools that can be used. And Labor Community Services has been working on two main campaigns, which is the Refugee Yes Next Door and the Yes It Matters campaign. The Refugee Next Door campaign aims to look at the situations of refugee and to speak about it in terms of understanding who refugees are, dispelling the myths. This campaign has an accompanying booklet and a video that gives some facts and myths about refugees, and hope that people who view them will take it to heart and to understand and to reach out to refugees and as they're in need and to help them. We have presented this to different settings. People have asked for presentations and we've made them, and we're available if you contact me through my email to make presentations to your groups. For people who are using this as a resource tool, read the brochure, look at the presentation, and then have conversation on what it really means for people who do not choose to leave their homes and their place of residence, but have had to do so. If your house is on fire, you just leave, you don't wait, and you hope that there's a reception elsewhere to greet you. Yes, It Matters is addressing systemic racism is another campaign. We understand, and as we've spoken here, racism is something that we live with on a daily basis. It does not go away. We have tried over time to make it and to dismantle it, but it hasn't. And in that fact, we then need to continually challenge it. And this brochure and the booklet itself talks about that. What do you need to do? We also have for unions, this campaign is primarily inward looking towards union, but is available to community groups to adapt and to use. When talking about racism, when working with racism, it is important to know that if we're going to dismantle a system, we need to do it with our own tools and not the tools that someone else gives us, because after all, you cannot dismantle the master's house using the master's tool. Finally, the self-care toolkit against racism. As many of the speakers have spoken, you understand that racism is something that happens and sometimes we're stunned at it. We can't even think in the moment how to respond. When COVID-19 was realized to be the sort of major infliction on our life, the pandemic that exercised itself across the globe, the first group that was attacked with this disease, beyond the infliction of the disease itself, was the Asian community, the East Asian community. And that was not new. SARS has already told us that. We had seen that happen. As the pandemic moved on and it continued, then other groups, other racialized groups began to be seen and in a light that was to some degree, expendable. And so in moments like these, we need to care for ourselves. And LCS has developed this tool that is useful and that people can use. You'll get this in an email format. Thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So up next, I'm gonna ask Susan McMurray to describe some of the Labor Council tools.
Thanks, Andrea. We're going to have a little bit of a slide deck here. I'm going to talk about 3 of the different tools that we have at the Labor Council, and some of them build on and support the kinds of things that Sharon has just talked about with the labor community services, and also touch on some things that Rosemarie said earlier. So the first one is what we call the Leader's Guide to Equity. The full name is A Leader's Guide to Strengthen Unions, Moving Beyond Diversity Towards Inclusion and Equity. It was developed in 2014, but it's still a really powerful document. As it says, it's a guide for unions and union leadership, and it contextualizes these issues for the 21st century labor movement. It complements Yes, It Matters by helping unions go deeper on work and really doing some of the important work. There are a number of activities inside at the table of contents, covers things like social mapping, structure policies and programs, assessing practices. So please take a look for that on our website. The next piece is the Charter of Inclusive Workplaces and Communities. You see an example of it here. It sits on the back page of Yes, It Matters. We developed it in 2017, building on something that had been done by the National Coalition of Canadian Muslims after the horrific murder of men at prayer, killed in cold blood because of their religion and their beliefs. As the information said earlier, a few dozen major unions and dozens of their locals have endorsed this, covering the construction sector, the education sector, health, private sector, and more. Now, the next piece actually also builds on this, and this is further to what Rosemarie was talking about. After nooses were found on Toronto's construction sites, you can shift to the next slide if you would, Labour Council worked with the City of Toronto, with construction unions, and with unionized employers to develop the Toronto Declaration of Inclusive Workplaces and Communities. You can get a copy of it at the website www.constructiondeclaration.ca, as it says here, and you can see the range of organizations that endorse this with quite a public display and supportive work by the Carpenters Union as well in getting it out. Rosemarie touched on some things because it's not enough to have a declaration. We also need the policies and programs at the City of Toronto level that go along with this. But if anyone needs a copy of this for your workplace, because your construction employer isn't paying serious attention to this, please visit the website. Thanks very much. Back over to you, Andria.
Thank you very much. And next we want to hear about the tools from Urban Alliance and Race Relation, and Anna Medina, can you take us through that?
Yes, for sure. Good evening, everyone. And I'll just be sharing and speaking on some of the tools or resources at our current work at UARR. So first we have the Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression Education Institute. So at the moment, we have provided professional development sessions to various sectors such as health, education, and provided specifically to the University Health Network, educators at Havergal College, and government officials at the Ministry of Transportation, as well as areas of the nonprofit sector. Currently, we are going to be launching a virtual anti-racism museum, and that will showcase and document anti-racism work in Canada, so keep posted for that. Feel free to also get in touch with us or visit our website, our UARR website for more information, and it should be posted in the chat. Next, I'll just be speaking about our Diversity Youth Fellowship Program. So you can go to the next slide. So this year we have 80 fellows in the program, and they come from the Muslim, Black, Filipino, and Tamil communities. We have now expanded our program to different sectors as well. You are welcome to check out our Diversity Youth Fellowship website as well in the chat for more information, as well as contact us if you would like to collaborate with us in this program. And yeah, the next that we would like to showcase is our Coalition for Racial Equity in Education project as well. So we have been working on system change in education alongside our partners that are on the slide as well. And this is within 5 different school boards. So you're welcome to visit our website as well for more information on the updates of this project and how you can get involved as well. And I'll pass it back to you, Andria.
Thank you. So you heard one of our panelists, Rosemarie Powell, talk about the community benefits. We have a short video that we would like to include in this presentation.
So my name is Cassandra Crease, and I'm with Local 1891, and Community Benefits is working for me.
My name is Musa Mutiga. I am a private contractor, and the Community Benefits Agreement is working for me.
My name is Tibor Cherry. I'm a member of Local Union 353, and Community Benefits Agreements are working.
My name is Godfrey Ejogu. I'm a member of Union 506, and Community Benefit Agreement, collective agreement, has worked fantastically for me.
My name is Rakaya Gay. People call me Rock. I represent the Local 27 Carpenters Union. Community Benefit Agreement works for me.
As all levels of governments continue to invest billions over the next decade to build important public infrastructure like transit, healthcare, and affordable housing, community benefit agreements can work to ensure that the good jobs and opportunities are shared equitably within our communities.
Okay, thank you. So we have also, we posted the link for all these tools in the chat. So please use them yourself and please share them widely within your own network. Each one is useful and shows the way in which labor and community align and work together to achieve our community goal. Our goal is to end white supremacy and also to fight for equity. Wow, like we cover so much. So I just want to thank, again, just to thank our speaker and also our moderator for tonight, for the presentation that we receive again. And before we wrap up, I want to say to every one of you that we have different sector and the conversation that we are hearing, and if we go backwards to just recently, where before we were in the street and we were all talking about what's happening, ending racism and discrimination, and an opportunity where George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, also opened back that door a little bit wider for us to acknowledge that this is real. And also, I think there was commitment that was also made. Government bodies made commitment. Some of them kneel on the street and they made commitment to take on this fight. But we also know that I think with that, and through COVID brought us, some of us closer, and we also see the opportunity for others to use this quiet time to start the rise of hate again. And from what the speakers are saying to us tonight, it's still on the rampage. It's not going to stop. And the people before us who took this journey and fought and died, it would be an injustice if we stop, because we are able at this point to join and to have support from each other to take on this fight. So I just want to say, let us continue, and you shouldn't be shutting up. We are glad that you could all participate in the 2022 International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination event, ending white supremacy. I can't shut up. On behalf of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council and the Urban and Race Relation and Labour Community Service, I thank you for joining us. But before you go, we did an opening with Elder Catherine Brooke, and we're going to ask her to do the closing again for us before we get off. So I'll turn over again to Elder Brooke.
Miigwech. We have spoken tonight from heart, mind, body, and spirit. And we have shared all the work that is going on in our great community here. We have to find the courage never to give up and to going forward. So tonight, we opened with the sweetgrass, which teaches the lesson of working together, because that's when we're strong. I offer this smoke for all of your work. I offer this smoke to the Creator and all the good spirits, of which we are good spirits, each and every one of us, that we will be strengthened, that we will be comforted, that we will find ways to carry on. Because we are thinking not only of ourselves in this present time, but of all the future generations that will come after us. And we have to help them by preparing a way for them to live in peace and harmony, to live without the scourge of white supremacy, without racial discrimination, whether it is ingrained in our institutions or whether it is a personal act against another person. We have to work on all of that to end it, because it's not something that is natural. It's not something that is in human beings naturally. They have to be taught those things. And we are dedicated to the unlearning of these things, the dismantling of these things. So I ask the Creator for blessings for you and those you love. I ask the Creator for blessings for those we do not love so much or at all. I ask the Creator for blessings for those we do not know in other lands that are being oppressed in other places, that we will not forget them. We won't forget them. And that we will bring our minds together to go forward. And so we will stop and close our council fire for this time. Che Miigwech, for all the people that have participated in this. Che Miigwech. Chamanitou, to you I say Miigwech, 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 Miigwech. Nikanagana, all of our relations. Miigwech.